A young woman suddenly vanished after what seemed like an ordinary evening with her family. Her husband appeared on television, tearfully pleading for his wife to return for the sake of their young children. The media quickly painted the picture of a heartless woman who had betrayed and abandoned everything behind. But then a seemingly insignificant detail became a crucial link, unraveling a horrifying truth that had been buried. What deception had this charade concealed, and who was truly the victim in this tragedy? I really don't know what to do anymore. We've searched everywhere, but there's still no trace. The only thing I hope for is that she comes back. These words you just heard were spoken before the cameras by Diego Alvarez, a husband who appeared devastated by his wife Brenda Montaña Requena's disappearance. According to his repeated statements, Brenda had fled after being discovered with another man, leaving him and their two young children in despair. This narrative was quickly picked up and spread widely by media outlets without any verification. But just days later, new testimonies and collected evidence revealed a much darker truth, exposing the false facade Diego had tried to wrap around himself and revealing the real person hiding behind that mask. Brenda Montaña Requena was born in 1995 in the city of Albardón, in San Juan Province, Argentina. She was the daughter of Americo Roberto Montaña and Laura Carmen Requena, growing up in a large family with 9 siblings. Despite difficult economic circumstances, Brenda's family was always close-knit, hardworking, and lived harmoniously together. Around 2012, when she was just 17 years old, Brenda met an older man named Diego, a butcher who also lived in San Juan Province. They quickly developed feelings for each other and began dating. After several years together and having 2 children, the couple decided to marry on November 18, 2016. Although both families expressed concerns about the age difference, by 2019, Brenda and Diego were living together in a small house in a poor neighborhood where they lived with Diego's mother and relatives. According to accounts, Diego's family had no affection for Brenda and often treated her poorly, especially when Diego was at work, leaving her alone at home to care for the children. The relationship between Brenda and Diego appeared stable on the surface, but reality was completely different. Several witnesses reported that their married life was quite tense, as Diego frequently displayed controlling, possessive behavior, and even violence toward Brenda. He monitored her visits to her family, something Brenda's family was unaware of, as the young woman always chose to remain silent and never shared anything about her situation. Related to this, Laura, Brenda's mother, later recounted in an interview that she once noticed bruises on her daughter's neck. When she sternly asked what had happened, Brenda just smiled awkwardly and said it was a game between the couple. Thinking her daughter was fine, the mother didn't ask any further questions. In June 2019, Brenda began using social media to reconnect with old friends and make new ones. This quickly angered Diego and became the source of many arguments between them. Since she didn't have her own phone, Brenda often borrowed the phone of a sister who was hospitalized after an accident to communicate with the outside world. With tensions escalating, on Wednesday, July 10th, Brenda, Diego, and their 2 young children visited Brenda's family. They spent the entire day with relatives and left around 8 p.m. None of them could have imagined that just hours later, everything would completely change. The next morning, around 10 a.m., Diego called Laura, Brenda's mother, in a confused and worried state, saying he didn't know where her daughter had gone. He appeared extremely panicked and expressed deep concern for her safety. However, what followed was full of contradictions. While recounting the incident with various versions, Diego claimed that Brenda had run away, even saying she had fled from a car while naked and had stolen a large sum of money from him. Immediately after the call, Diego went to the police station to report Brenda missing. He stated that his wife had only said she was going out for a short walk, but he suspected there was something else behind it. Continuing his story, Diego told police that a few days earlier, Brenda had confessed to him that she was having an affair with another man. However, according to him, their married life was still very good and he never thought this could lead to her sudden disappearance. Because of all this, Diego said he had to verify with his own eyes what was happening. According to his account, He had secretly followed Brenda and saw her go to an empty lot just a few yards from their house. There, he discovered her in a car with a strange man. In his anger, Diego threw a rock at the other man, causing him to flee in panic. As for Brenda, Diego claimed she also immediately ran away, and since then, he had no idea where she had gone. Additionally, Diego said this wasn't the first time Brenda had left their shared home. Therefore, initially, the local police chief also shared with the media that they believed the young woman was still alive and hiding somewhere. Without delay, that same day, police launched a large-scale search campaign. Both Brenda's family and Diego actively participated. However, by July 12th, despite deploying search dogs, horses, police forces, and even drones, no trace of the young woman had been found. At that point, Laura began to suspect that her daughter might have been assaulted by Diego and was therefore hiding. That evening, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she directly asked Diego whether he had hit Brenda. Faced with this direct question, Diego only remained silent with his head down, saying nothing, a reaction that made her even more anxious. In the following days, Diego began appearing before the media, appearing extremely sad and heavily affected by his wife's disappearance. Before the cameras, he tearfully said that if Brenda was watching, he begged her to return for the children, for the family. He pleaded with her to appear, just so everyone would know she was still alive, and if possible, to look at the children for a moment, because at this time, they really needed their mother. However, that wasn't all. Between his sobs, Diego also repeated his claim of being a victim of betrayal, what he had told police, while emphasizing that they had been married for 8 years and had 2 children together, as if to cement the image of a suffering and abandoned husband in the public eye. However, it was Diego's emotional statements that became the point where Brenda's family began to have doubts. They described Brenda as a devoted mother who always loved and cared for her children wholeheartedly. Therefore, for them, the idea that she would suddenly leave, abandoning 2 children without a word, was completely illogical and even unbelievable. Despite this, most media outlets at the time still chose to believe Diego's account. Without conducting deeper investigation, they hastily published articles with heavy headlines, describing Brenda as a woman who betrayed her husband and heartlessly abandoned her children. Her image was quickly tarnished, becoming a scapegoat in the public eye, causing an uproar and creating a wave of fierce criticism. However, shortly after, a pair of teenagers unexpectedly came forward as witnesses. Their testimony completely overturned the entire case. And this time, Brenda was no longer the villain, as the national media had portrayed her. On the contrary, the truth they revealed began to unveil a completely different story, dark, horrifying, and full of mysteries. Everything began to take a completely different direction on July 13th, when Jose Miguel Guajardo, the young man allegedly with Brenda in the car when Diego threw the rock, officially accused Diego of the attack that occurred 2 days earlier. According to his testimony, Diego had used a rock to attack him, causing injury to his left hand. Jose recounted that on the morning of July 11th, he had arranged to meet Brenda near a railroad track area, a location they had agreed upon through a social media conversation. Brenda came to the meeting point on foot, and they had talked for a few minutes as usual. However, the meeting quickly turned into a nightmare when Diego suddenly appeared. Without warning, he lunged forward and punched Brenda hard in the face, then angrily threw a rock at Jose. Although Jose managed to raise his left hand to block it, he was still injured and immediately fled in panic. When he looked back, he saw Diego still standing near Brenda while shouting threats. "Get out of here, or I'll kill you!" Jose's testimony not only completely refuted Diego's previous story, but also raised clear suspicions about Diego's violent behavior and true motives behind his actions. Faced with these new developments, police quickly issued an arrest warrant for Diego on charges of minor assault. At the same time, they confirmed that Brenda was indeed in a romantic relationship with Jose, something that had previously only been Diego's one-sided claim. Meanwhile, authorities continued their efforts to find Brenda, hoping she was still alive. On July 15th, An important breakthrough occurred when search dogs tracked some suspicious footprints around Jose's house. This discovery further supported the initial hypothesis police were considering, that Brenda might be deliberately hiding and didn't want to be found. Based on this assumption, authorities conducted a search of Jose's house, assuming Brenda was hiding there. However, after a thorough search, they found no trace or evidence of the young woman's presence in that house. However, the next day, unexpected information brought a shocking turn to the case when two teenagers, aged 14 and 17, after following the news and learning about the incident, came to the police station with their families to testify. They said that while hunting birds in a nearby area, they had seen a man park his motorcycle on a nearby street. They then witnessed this person start a fire, and when he noticed the presence of the two teenagers, he became worried, anxious, and approached them with the intention of bribing them to leave and not reveal what had happened. When police asked them to describe the man they had encountered, both teenagers clearly described the same person. It was Diego. This was a huge shock to everyone, as the man the media had previously portrayed as a suffering husband, betrayed and abandoned by his wife along with two children, had now become the main suspect in Brenda's disappearance. The story that media outlets had built about an evil woman abandoning her family was now beginning to collapse. However, this was only the real beginning of the investigation, as police immediately asked the two young men to point out the exact location where they had witnessed the incident. With this crucial lead, they began moving to the empty lot the teenagers had described. When they arrived at 7:50 p.m., they discovered a horrific scene, the remains of a body that had been dismembered and then burned beyond recognition. This sight left the investigators deeply shaken, but the case didn't stop there. After continuing their thorough search, they found a torso, along with a skull and tibia, all wrapped in roofing material. Nearby, they also discovered animal bones, which made investigators suspect that the perpetrator had intentionally placed these bones there to mislead or confuse police during the search process. These discoveries not only disrupted all previous assumptions, but also opened up a series of dark events that were gradually being revealed, raising questions about the perpetrator's motives and cruel behavior. However, although everyone believed the remains found were Brenda's, authorities still couldn't confirm this immediately. They needed to perform DNA tests to definitively confirm it was her. While the media and authorities were busy with the investigation, Laura, Brenda's mother, stood at a close distance observing. When she saw the movement of vehicles and police forces, she decided to approach the discovery site. In just a moment, she recognized a silver cat-shaped necklace, an item her daughter always wore, lying among the remains. This was indeed Brenda's possession, which caused Laura to completely collapse, as if her entire world had crumbled at once. Her family felt the same way. They had always hoped that Brenda would be found alive. On the night of July 16th, the remains were transferred to the hospital's molecular biology laboratory for testing and analysis. After receiving results from the tests, reports confirmed what everyone had suspected. It was indeed Brenda. After conducting forensic examinations, experts determined that Brenda's death was due to strong pressure on her neck, preventing her from continuing to breathe. Afterward, her body was dismembered and burned using several tires, with the clear purpose of destroying evidence. With this conclusion, Diego's status changed completely. From being detained for minor assault, he was immediately charged with murder. Meanwhile, an analysis of Diego's statements regarding Brenda's disappearance was conducted on a television program on July 18th. Experts analyzed his body posture, gestures, and voice, and noticed he showed signs of anxiety, with clear expressions of discomfort and contradiction compared to the story he had told. These abnormalities further raised doubts about the truthfulness of Diego's statements, making him the main suspect in the case. Among the notable points, experts particularly noted Diego's eyes, as he always looked down, a clear sign of very concerning shame. Additionally, in another moment, he looked to the side, which, according to investigators' assessment, was a sign of guilt. But the situation became even more complex when on July 19th, a third testimony was presented. Jose, who had previously testified about the incident, added details he had previously omitted. He revealed that Brenda and he had a friendship through one of his sisters. For that reason, they had met a few times, but especially on April 30th, 2019, when both began talking and developing their relationship. These details further clarified the relationship between Brenda and Jose, while increasing suspicion about Diego's actions and motives. However, the most important thing for the case investigation was Jose's confirmation that on the day of the incident, when he fled, he looked back for a moment and saw Brenda kneeling on the ground while Diego brutally beat her face. Jose repeated this in an interview with the media and with Laura, Brenda's mother, when she came to his house to seek information about her daughter following rumors. However, instead of reporting to authorities, Jose chose to go drinking with friends. He explained that he was not only afraid of Diego's violent attitude, but never imagined that such a thing could happen. At that time, he didn't think the situation could become so serious. Meanwhile, Laura and the family continued to pressure and call for justice through social media platforms. They still couldn't accept what had happened, especially knowing that Diego, whom she always called her son-in-law, and who seemed harmonious with the family, was the perpetrator of all these cruel acts. As for Diego's relatives, they expressed great surprise and couldn't believe that someone they described as hardworking and, according to them, loving toward his wife and children could commit such a brutal act. The image his family had built of an ideal husband and father had completely collapsed. Meanwhile, the couple's children were now living under the care of one of Diego's aunts. She shared that the two children constantly asked about their mother and father, not understanding what was happening. This further increased the pain and confusion for Brenda's family, as the children didn't know that their father was the one who had caused this tragedy. Continuing with the case developments, on August 2, 2019, Diego was read the evidence against him. About 5 hours later, the decision was made that Diego would leave his place at the police station and be officially tried for murder. This charge had double aggravating circumstances due to the family relationship and gender-based violence. In his ruling, the judge clearly stated that Diego was blindly jealous and had subjected Brenda to serious violent situations. In the same month, the judges of the first chamber of the criminal court, who were in charge of the case, conducted an inspection at the site where Brenda's body was found. The inspection team included the plaintiff's lawyer, defense lawyer, and prosecutor, with the purpose of comparing the testimonies of witnesses and Diego himself about how the events unfolded, leading to Brenda's tragic death. Laura, Brenda's mother, also participated along with her husband and some of their children. They were the first to participate in this inspection and witnessed the stages of the comparison process. According to information, this was the only inspection that the court judges conducted throughout the case. For the prosecutor, who had requested this procedure from the judges, the on-site inspection was considered a basic and important step in the trial process. From this inspection, the judges could confirm that what the witnesses testified was accurate, and therefore became irrefutable evidence against Diego, who was facing life imprisonment for murder with aggravating circumstances. The sentence for Diego was carefully considered by the court, with a 35-year prison term without any special benefits. However, the pain and desire for justice remained unabated in Brenda's family's hearts. In March 2020, Ayelen, one of Brenda's sisters, used social media to call for justice, demanding life imprisonment for Diego and sharing a moving message in memory of her unfortunate sister. Laura, Brenda's mother, also couldn't contain her pain and anger over what had happened while expressing her great love for her daughter. After months of silence, the case seemed to quiet down until May 24, 2021, when the final hearing began in the first chamber of the criminal court. There, Diego took the stand and admitted to killing his wife, but then said he couldn't remember anything else about what happened that day. This was part of the defense lawyer's strategy, who tried to prove that Diego had acted under violent emotion, using the reason that he knew Brenda was deceiving him with Jose. However, the next day, a psychologist took the stand describing Diego as a chauvinist with a cold, controlling personality lacking empathy. This expert affirmed that Diego was completely lucid when committing the crime, showing this couldn't be considered a case of violent emotion. During the trial, the plaintiff's lawyer asked the psychologist why she thought Diego had filed the missing person report immediately after committing the crime. The expert replied that in her view, this action reflected Diego's manipulative personality issues. His proactive exposure of the incident was a way to control the investigation, an action showing manipulation in how he dealt with the situation. Next, Jose took the stand and recounted the entire incident that occurred on July 11th, 2019. However, during his testimony, Diego suddenly interrupted and demanded that Jose tell the truth about what had happened. The court immediately stopped this interaction to keep the trial from being disrupted. Immediately after, one of the teenagers who had participated in bird hunting on the day of the incident took the stand and said that when he accidentally saw Diego, he felt the man seemed very confused, and he also noticed that Diego's hands were stained with blood. This testimony further increased suspicion about Diego's behavior, especially as the case circumstances had gradually become clearer. Although the case had made clear progress, there was still one important hearing, perhaps the most difficult of all, to be conducted on Wednesday, May 26th. In this hearing, Laura, Brenda's mother, had to take the stand. Between tearful sobs and unbearable pain, Laura recounted that on the day her daughter disappeared, Diego had contacted her multiple times, but each time gave contradictory versions of what had happened. Additionally, she referred to Diego as a jealous and violent man who had beaten her daughter. Laura recalled those moments when she discovered bruises on Brenda's neck, and her daughter had explained that it was a game between her and her husband. Remembering all those events, Laura continued to affirm that Diego was extremely controlling, not allowing her daughter to have her own social media accounts or mobile phone without sharing them with him. These details further clarified Diego's authoritarian and violent nature, while serving as important evidence for the case. After all testimonies were collected, on June 18, 2021, Diego Alvarez was sentenced to life imprisonment through a digital trial due to the global health emergency as the COVID-19 pandemic was raging. The first chamber of the criminal court ruled to sentence Diego to life imprisonment, marking an important turning point in the case. This was a great relief for Laura and her entire family, who had stood outside the courthouse. Although nothing could bring Brenda back, they finally felt that justice had been served. Although the case seemed to be closed, it wasn't over. Jose, who witnessed the attack but didn't intervene, was also prosecuted for failure to render aid. He was censured for not intervening to save Brenda when she was attacked by Diego, and instead decided to abandon her at the scene. This reason stemmed from a complaint filed by Laura. Jose's trial began in September 2022, during which the court pointed out that Jose had fled the scene after the attack occurred and didn't immediately notify police or help Brenda. These actions could have prevented the tragedy. During the trial, Jose's defense asked the judge to dismiss the criminal action, only requiring him to pay a fine and compensate for the damage he caused. This penalty was confirmed by the San Juan Court of Justice in May 2023. Here, the case of Brenda Montaña Requena was closed, and justice was served. But perhaps for Brenda's family, the pain will never fade away. And that's today's case. Thank you for following along, and see you in the next videos.